annually, like a daycare or those kind of things. There may be other buildings that if you're inspecting them once every 5 years or whatever. So I'm thinking of like, okay, the Berkshire Hathaway building is new. It probably doesn't need a safety inspection annually, whereas other things might need one annually. And so it could be paid for with maybe some sort of increase in the business license, and then that would free up that whole element for code enforcement to concentrate on other things. But that may be something we could hire out to, say, an independent contractor that's qualified. I don't know how you all would feel about that, but that may be one answer that frees up other time for other responsibilities. Something to consider.
And then if you did that, then you would fund that probably by a small increase in the business license fee.
That would certainly be something I'd consider.
That would be a separate fee.
A
Cannot
separate
change the business license.
Yeah, that's right, because the business license is a tax expense. Yeah, you'd have to have a separate business license fee, I guess. Inspection fee.
My concern, my priority would be to do it in, obviously in the fairest way possible. But what I'm nervous about is that we're going to come up with, a process, a mode of operations that we're going to try to follow, and we're going to do it that's not realistic with the staff number that we have. So I just would urge, as we come up with these ideas, being fair, we definitely want to be fair. But how can we do that in a way that's realistic? And maybe like you said, was it Becky, you said that you do it you would separate it into quadrants or into different areas?
That's what they've done in the past.
Yeah. Does that work well?
Well, ask them.
Yeah.
I know.
I know when you do it in, like you mentioned, quadrants, it rotates to where everybody's going to get inspected and played fairly. When you contract out, you talk about getting qualified, certified people, and those people are going to charge a significant amount. So like I said, if you got a contractor or inspector working for an engineering company, I think their price is probably $150 an hour to come out and inspect.
But that would just be for public safety inspections, right?
Yes,
And it
correct.
could be, and I know this probably wouldn't be very popular with the business owners, but it could be that fee could go to the business owner. And I'm just throwing it out there. That's one option.
Yes. Now,
How
I know
long
there's
do you-
some,
That's not very popular.
How long do they take to do these?
depending on the size of the buildings, like if you got a small building like Debbie Hunt's building, probably take an hour, 15 minutes.
And you said we have about 200 and some that need that?
224.
And just,
And keep in mind, like a nursing home or a Walmart is gonna take a considerable amount more time than a small
Yes.
storefront.
But there are some communities out there, I want to say St. Joseph, like they do, where you get an annual inspection or an inspection once every 2 years or 4 years, something like that.
It could be a case where all new businesses get a thorough inspection and then be on like a 3 or 4 year schedule after that.
Yeah, like, for example, the infrastructure downtown, those buildings have been neglected for a long period of time. You have some property owners that have maintained their buildings. I would concentrate more on the downtown area, if we were to start with public safety, because those are the most, I would say, concerns that we have as a downtown area.
So if we separated into quadrants, let's say, and
are you talking about nuisance public?
I know, we keep going, we're all over the place. I'm talking about nuisance violations
Okay,
now. Yeah.
that's okay.
So if we take nuisance violations and we separate them into quadrants, different areas of the town. I know you said, Tim, that you didn't like complaint based, but what if a neighbor complains about somebody's property? Are we just going to ignore it?
No, we respond to those calls, but to sit dormant and just wait for a complaint to come in, that's probably.
Right, I see.
No, actually, there was our last code enforcement, she had something happened on Grand, and so that owner, comes to me and shows me all the other good things on Grand that need to be dealt with.
Right.
So I took her on the same trip, and they all specifically got notices.
Okay.
So that's, sometimes they're only C1, but there's more there
Okay.
in that area. And believe me, if you're like on Chestnut Walnut and all that, they're gonna notice you. You can't.
Right.
On the edge of town, sometimes you won't get noticed.
Okay.
Vanessa's gonna use.
I would say, my first guess would be the first time through all these businesses are gonna take a lot longer than they would be, we're doing them every year for 5 years. I'm not sure, if you took nuisance out and you got rid of your new construction building plans, can 2 people, 40 hours a week, do the top 2 and still have extra time?
Currently, now with all the constructions that's in process, it will be included, yes.
Well, that's what I'm saying, if you're focusing on the top 2, and there's 2 of you, is there gonna be time left over to patrol for nuisance violations? You know, I'm guessing probably not. So you're almost answering what you can do with 2 people, you know?
Well, didn't we talk about that to get your business license, you can actually have the inspection anywhere within the year so that you guys can kind of plan those, stagger them? Because they all come due in June. So if, I'd say, you know, get me on a schedule for August, and then that'll be good for next June. Yes, Yes.
There's some municipalities that do what we're wanting to do right now, I'm sure, that are about our size. How do they do it? How much time does it take? You know, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of question marks that we don't have. I mean, unless you have a very good estimate of what 2 people can do.
Well, Roy, you asked that question last time, and so we asked that question from various cities, so we just went out and took 4 cities that were from our list of 12 comparable cities. We asked Excelsior Springs, Smithville, Kearney, and Chillicothe. Excelsior Springs did a combination of complaint-driven and staff, so they would answer the questions when people made complaints, but the staff would go out and do it. It wasn't exclusively one or the other. Smithville said it was totally staff-initiated. They mostly went out and the staff went out and found, not that they didn't answer complaints, their method was staff-driven. Kearney said they were purely complaint-driven. They didn't go out and do anything until they got a complaint. And Chillicothe said that they were staff and complaint-driven, but they also had monthly public hearings where these complaints would come in front of the city council, and they would hear what those complaints were, so the city council could have some input on them on a regular basis. So each city does it in a variety of ways, and it is whatever has kind of fit the culture of that city.
And how many staff do each one of those cities have for inspectors?
Yeah, they're about the same as we are. They don't have a lot more.
No, it's either 2 or it's 1.
I don't know the exact number.
Well, that makes it different.
I know that.
Is if they've got 2 inspectors or if they've got 1.
Smithville, I think they have, I talked to Smithville, I think they have 1 building inspector, 1 code enforcement officer. Excelsior Springs have 1 building inspector, 1 code enforcement officer.
But we don't know about the other 2.
I didn't talk to those cities.
Can we find that out?
Yes. On the public safety inspections, you know, you have a whole year to get those done. It's not like you have to go out there and say, I gotta do 50 of those in 1 week. So you can spread those out. The normal business of the building inspections, you know, like I said, the larger commercial development is gonna free up Paul when you outsource those build plan review. So that's gonna free him up to do more building inspections. You know, the regular contractors go out and say, Paul, I need a footing and foundation, I need a rough plumbing. You know, those take about 15 to 20 minutes to do. The nuisance violation, you know, if you have the right staff, they should be well trained in all aspects of the job requirements and the duties to do, where they can, if they're driving down the street, they see something that caught their eye, they should be able to say, hey, I'm gonna take a picture of this, you know, get a case started and go from there. It doesn't take very long to open up a case and then, you know, start to open line of communication to try to get some input from that property owner to get that problem resolved.
Seems like, you know, this person we hire will presumably be brand new at this, unless we find somebody who has this experience, which is probably a crapshoot, right? It might.
No, I mean, there's
Yeah.
people out there that's looking that have
Yeah.
ICC certifications, whether it's a plan review, a building inspector, whatever certification.
Because I was thinking, you know, maybe whoever we hire could focus solely on nuisance violations, and Paul and Tim, as needed, could focus on public safety and then building inspections unless we have a major project which we might want to contract out.
But we've had two inspections, two inspectors. Now, one was just
Yeah.
mainly nuisance, but we have done a building or a public safety inspection for
Yeah.
about a year. I mean, if there was that much time left over, I'm sure they would already serve two of them, is my point.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know, you know, if you're spending 80 hours a week during building inspections and, or maybe you have 10 hours a week left over that you can patrol, but we don't know what that number is until you start doing it. You know, you may have 20 hours a week that you can patrol.
Well, this is all new, seriously, so we're going to trust that they know how to manage it as best as they can. And I think the direction that we're gonna give them is when they do have time and opportunity to do that, what kind of degree of nuisance do we want them to do?
That's fair. Yeah. So don't split it up evenly,
Just
right? But yeah.
let them do their
Right,
job.
I get you.
I love it.
That's all I'm supposed
That's-
to do, just let them do their job.
And working in this type of industry, you're not gonna catch everything. There's not enough time in the day to patrol or to be in two places at once. So you have to manage your time well.
Now, if we are wanting to have code enforcement, do what?
Sorry.
Code enforcement to do what, you know, whatever it is we want them to do, then it might be a good idea to have a committee that will take the grievances. We already have people that have applied for
I
that.
think we have to have one, right?
According to ordinance, yes, and
We
we
could
can
change the ordinance. but-
we can change the ordinance or follow through on it.
Right, that's fair.
So that kind of goes with the degree of intensity or.
And I do like the sound of that grievance committee because it takes, you know, people are gonna be angry about this. They're gonna wanna be able to go and state their case somewhere.
They want to be heard.
Yeah, and I understand that. I would wanna be heard too. And so I think it's a good idea. And it takes, I mean, that way, it takes some of the pressure off the people who are out there inspecting.
Steve always said that they always had bullseye on their backs.
Yeah.
But that comes with the job.
I know.
You know, a lot of people don't like to hear what you have to tell them, but how you explain it to them, they will receive it better. You know, like this is one of the toughest positions to be in, but at the same time, you have to understand, and get them to understand that there's a purpose for this. It's not that we're picking with you or picking on you, it's just what we were hired to do.
Sure.
And, you know, there's people that you work with that, you know, they don't have the same financial resources that other people may have, or they don't have the physical capabilities of doing something. You work with that person. You keep working with them. You also have to understand that there's a time when you have to draw the line and say, hey, I gave you 30 days, I gave you another 30 days, and you've done nothing. It's out of my hands. I mean, you know, then you can take it to the grievance board, the Board of Appeals, but the Board of Appeals are there for people who want to basically state their case and also for the city staff to prove their case as well, looking at the facts, the code itself. It's not emotions that get wrapped up in the decisions based on the facts and the codes. And that's what people need to understand.
And I think if you're gonna have a committee, it should be a last resort. I don't think it ought to start with the committee. I think they need to go through the proper channels before you have them go to the committee. I just think it ought to be a last resort. I personally don't think we ought to have a committee. I think it's just gonna be that many more people that are gonna make that person mad if they don't, you know, side with them. But if you're gonna have a committee, it needs to be a last resort. It shouldn't be there to bypass, the proper authority first. That's where it needs to go first.
That's what the committee does. It actually allows working to get it to be resolved, since obviously it wasn't working.
If it hasn't been resolved.
Right.
So in order for it to be resolved, they need to start with people that are,
Great, agree, but when you say last resort, it should still be a part of the whole process, correct?
well, let's just say that Tim has somebody and they get a violation letter and they come in and they sit down and they talk with them and they work it out. Doesn't need to go to the committee.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying is the last resort.
Oh, okay, okay. The committee's still there, it's just that that is for when people really butt heads.
Or if you can't get it worked out with the staff that's there.
Right.
Right.
Of course, gotcha.
Okay.
One of the comments that I heard a couple of times tonight is let them do their job. And so we have, I think we all can agree that we have limited resources, limited amount of time. So the stuff that we can, at a reasonable price, get out the door so that we can concentrate on what we do best. So for example, the plan review, if you're building a new high school or new basement hall, we get that out the door. And let them make a decision on what goes out the door and what stays. On the safety inspections of the building, again, if there's a building that is in great shape, then it probably doesn't need inspected as often as one that has a lot of challenges and is much more of a safety issue. Now, you may collect, maybe everybody is paying an extra $30 a year or whatever for safety inspections. And some of them, and it's just done as needed, everybody gets rotated through on whatever's a reasonable basis. But again, you kind of turn that over. So if safety inspections are outsourced, major plan reviews are outsourced, then it comes down to them kind of running the department, and then we see how it works out. I mean, we have so many unknowns. We haven't done it that way. We've got a new person coming on.
Here we have a young lady who...
Do we want to approach it that way and then, come back and reassess after 6 months? I don't know.
I don't know why we don't just give them, they've asked us quite a bit to find what we want them to do when they have the opportunity to do it. We don't need to come back together again. We can either just tell them, when you've got the time, let's have this type of code enforcement attempted. Now, if you want to come back and assess and ask how's it going, that's fine, but I think they really want.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. If we're having problems and it's working, if we're not having problems and it's working, okay, then we're going in a good direction. If we have some challenges, and we'll sit and talk about it and see if we need to course correct. But we have to make a decision to start something. So I don't know how the rest of you feel about that kind of thing. I've heard it kind of alluded to at different times during this conversation. So, Councilwoman, you.
I think that the biggest challenge that you're going to have is if you have both inspectors doing the same job and dividing them up, the biggest challenge you're gonna have is consistency. So when you hire somebody to do inspections with Paul, they're gonna have the same philosophy, because if they don't have the same philosophy, and we got this one over here doing this one, and this one over here doing this one, that's gonna be your biggest challenge. That's what I think.
But I would speculate they'll handle that internally with the manager and sort through that stuff, would be my first reaction. But yes, I can see exactly what you're saying, and that would be a point of friction, maybe.
Well, I understand that, but we're sitting here talking about how code enforcement is supposed to be done, so.
Right. Okay. So, I don't know, manager, do you have what you think you need, or do we need to keep going, or what?
Well, there are two things. One is we have drafted a resolution setting a code enforcement policy. So I've sent that out to everybody. What I'll do is we'll try to capture what everybody has said tonight and include it in that, and I will pass it out to you again.
But have we come to any
No, we
conclusions
haven't.
tonight?
Okay, I'll be the first one. I think
Yeah.
it needs to be staff and, the combination of staff and, I'm gonna lose my words today. No, yeah, somebody calling it.
So staff, you see, you can separate it into.
I'm saying if you're doing all this other stuff and you're doing, handling the complaints that are over there, and I've got 3 hours a week that's not dedicated to that, well, that's what I want to give to nuisance. Or if that's not enough, you're gonna have to get rid of more building inspector stuff. Well, I mean, it's going, I think how you limit that is going to dictate how much of those.
But that's theirs to do.
Right.
So I would agree. Yeah.
You may have 20 hours a week to do that, patrol or whatever, but you may have 2.
We just don't know what we're working with, so we're going further, is I think that's what you're saying.
But if you get the right people, the right staff, which we have that Paul, if you're out going on your way to inspection, his first instinct will be, hey, I see this, I'm gonna come back to that later, I'm gonna pick that up or turn that in or see what's going on. You have to have the right personnel, individual to be able to do this work. I think we're getting caught up on the numbers between those top 3. I mean, there's not a quota that we try to meet, but if you balance and manage your time well, you can get some of that stuff accomplished.
I mean, I'm just hearing a mix of let them do their job, which I agree, right? But I'm also hearing we need a philosophy to follow. So I don't really, I just want to make sure we're providing you guys with the answers you need while not micromanaging, right? There's a fine line between that. So, have we answered any of your questions about what you want from us? Because I'm still confused.
I would say this is probably more discussion than we've had in the past on this topic. It's a good discussion. We haven't come to any conclusion, so keep working.
Let's come to a-
Yeah, we still have 20 minutes, right? Unless we.
Okay, I made my conclusion, next.
Would it make sense to just each one of us say their philosophy, and then you guys can sort through it and see where you think the majority's at?
Well, yes, and you'd asked me about if we had what we needed, and the reason I talked about a resolution that we could draft up and we would put into it all of these things that we've seen and give it to you. And the reason we'd ask you to do that is then you could vote on it. And the way the city council states its intent is by passing resolutions and ordinances. And then when we go out and do this, if someone says, why are you doing that? We'll say, well, because that's what the council told us to do. And that way we have the answer. Why are we doing it? Because that's the philosophy you said. We'll write this up in a way that generally everybody can agree on. We'll put all the things that you've said into it and send it out to you as a draft, and we'd ask you to write it up and see what you think. And that's the way we would know, because then you can vote on it.
So we're not disputing, we're leaving the codes in place that are in place.
Right, we're not talking about the codes, although that is an important issue you raised, Roy, and that is if there are codes that should be changed, we should do that. I had a long conversation with a local real estate agent today about that very subject. If there are some codes that need to be changed, we should bring them up and change them one at a time. We don't have to accept the 3-inch thick book and that's the law. You make the law, and if we want to take some out of there, we should do that. And I have asked the public to come back and let us know what ones we should not have in the code book anymore. The second thing, in addition to a resolution setting code enforcement policy, is you talked a little bit about a code enforcement appeal board or a grievance committee. We have that in the ordinance, and we can either set that up or not set that up as you desire, but I think it's up to you to determine if you want to have that board or not.
Council?
I like the idea of having a board.
Wrong or right, it's a way for a citizen to have a voice.
And I think one of the things that there could be a misunderstanding on, so we'll just go ahead and flesh it out now. It's also, I would take somewhat of a political board, because they're deciding if what's been enforced is reasonable or not. So for example, the Little Widow has got a ditch that's that severe, and the grass on it is over 8 inches tall, or whatever the number is. Okay, does she get a ticket or not? And so she may feel like that's not fair, it's unreasonable, I can't mow something like that, nobody else can. Even the city maybe isn't taking care of stuff like that. So it's a grievance that she can sit there and say, are they enforcing things reasonably or not? Now, I have initially understood that it was just going to be a very black and white thing. Well, you're either in violation or not. But then I'm led to believe, no, it's more of functioning in the gray area of what, it might be in violation, but is it reasonable?
I think that
So-
I think that's right, because when it comes down to black and white, it's pretty easy for the staff to see what's in the code. It's really then a question of the interpretation of it and what's reasonable. And also, that's a good way for the staff to know and bring back to the council codes that maybe ought to be changed. If it's not right and we're enforcing it, but it doesn't seem right for this community, maybe that's a good way to change it.
I think it boils down to the individual who's out there actually enforcing the codes. It comes with a little bit of common sense. And it's like, like I said before, it's the way you talk to somebody, get them to understand it, explain to them. Like if a little old lady, a little widow can't get that 8-inch tall grass in the ditch, we understand that. Since we've been here, Paul and I came across situations like that where we tried to find another outlet for that person, you know, whether it's a contractor that the city may hire or if it's a Boy Scout project to take on stuff like that. I mean, the code is black and white, but there's also some room for that individual to use common sense to make a sound decision. So I don't think we need to get into changing this code, changing that code, because then you're getting into a bigger issue.
Well, what you said, the code is black and white, but the enforcement is all gray.
I don't think that works. I don't think it's gonna work like that. I don't think you can have part of it black and white and part of it gray.
I wouldn't state it like that. I'll just say, based on my experience, I've done code enforcement before and I've been quite successful. I just work with people. And you have to have people, same people, staff like that work with that individual and try to figure out how you get to the end results. How you do that, everybody's situation is different. Everybody's situation is different. It's a two-part effort. It's effort on the staff part, and it's an effort on the individual, the person that you're talking to. They have to be making a concerted effort as well as staff. And I feel confident. I don't worry about when Paul goes out there to talk to somebody, because I know his capabilities. I know how he handles situation. I would say 98% of the time, there's a solution when Paul's involved.
So he's saying that there is black and white, but how it's implemented is caring and working through. So he believes in it, and I believe in it as well.
Yep.
Because he's been working it.
Yep. I'll give you an example. Julie, you had a complaint, or you received a complaint about a property. I want to list the address in there. Every time I went and talked to that individual,
I'm sorry, what did you say?
there was a complaint that you received that you gave to Steve, and I went out and checked it out. This individual that lived there, nice person, but mean person. I mean, she hated that I was there, and I'll spend 30, 40 minutes there talking to her about the neighbors complaining about their property and the condition of it. And I would explain to her grandson, her daughter, got down to the root of the problem. Her daughter was bringing the stuff, the debris, all the stuff to the yard. And I had a kind of one-on-one conversation with that individual. I said, hey, so you're making it hard for your mother. You know, I talked to the grandson. I said, you're making it hard for your grandmother. Your grandmother's getting all these tickets. You guys need to stop doing this. And I literally walked through the yard with them. Say, hey, you got to remove this, remove that, do this. You know, I tell everybody, our goal is not to write you tickets. I personally hated writing tickets because it's a waste of time. It's a process, but it's a waste of time. I tell the people, I'd rather that you just clean this up, and that way everybody's happy. You get to go home, I get to go home, and not have to write any more paperwork. And like, it goes back to that individual, that person that you hire for that position. They have to have the right mindset to be able to communicate with people.
Well, we've got about 12 minutes left, and I'm wondering if each of us gave our philosophy of code enforcement, then the staff would be able to hear 5 different views, and then they can compile something that they think will hit a majority of the opinions. So if we're all right doing that, just go down the line, if that works, if you want to start that.
That's fine. I do think separating it into quadrants or groups or, you know, whatever the number of sections of the city are, I would be okay with that. I think it would help organize the focus. And I think so in that sense, it should be under the, you know, the term staff. It should be staff going out and monitoring in sections. Inevitably, there are going to be some complaints that people have about their neighbors, and we're going to have to take those. But being solely complaint-driven is probably a recipe for a certain level of disaster. So while we have to listen to them, that shouldn't be necessarily our focus. So I would separate it into groups, go do your thing, you know, use your judgment. And then I do believe that there should be a grievance committee, you know, a dispute committee, whatever you want to call it, that should be there as a backup or to, you know, basically a court of appeals, essentially. Now, as far as who that group should be, there's been a couple things that I've heard from just talking to everybody is that the Board of Adjustments is willing and able to do it, and then there are members in the community who have volunteered to do it. I'm not really sure why you couldn't have a mix of both. I've heard that idea come up, and I think you know, that would satisfy any problem people had with just one or the other committee doing it. As long as you want an odd number, I presume. But I think having a committee mixed with the Board of Adjustments and the volunteers in the community would be one option that I would be in favor of. Does that help clarify my views?
Well, my philosophy is based on nuisance violation inspections. I think you ought to start with the worst and work your way down. I do not believe there ought to be a committee. I think if you're enforcing the code the way the code should be enforced, I don't think there's a need for a committee.
And how did you want to go from the worst down to these first specials?
Right. Well, let me give you an example. I've been driving by the same house for 10 years now. Not much has been done on that house. It ought to be having some kind of letter or, and maybe they are in court and we just don't know that. But I would think it, with 10 years, that property ought to be done by now.
Being restored or just, yeah, you have to do that.
Both.
Councilwoman?
I agree a lot with what John said because I think we should have it fair around the city. I think they need to, I trust them to make sure that they do kind of what Julie said first, and make sure that it's, I trust all that. And I also think the mixture of the adjustment and the volunteers that have already applied to do that, I think that would be a really good mixture for our community. And I really think the fact that the people in our community have literally had no code enforcement nuisance for over about a year now. So it's going to be pretty tough to get started on this because they are used to not cutting, grass and stuff. So just, I know they know this, and my heart goes out to them because, you know, you've had this big break and now you got to do it. But I think we as a council are looking at the big picture and not how difficult it's going to be to get started. And I trust you to do a good job and to do it fairly.
I think that the time that you have after doing your building inspections and public safety inspections is gonna dictate how aggressive you can be with nuisance. I mean, you're gonna have complaint driven, which has always been that way. People call in, you deal with that complaint. It can come from any of the staff in the city. I mean, but until you know how much time you have over that, that's how aggressive. If you only have one policeman on duty, you're only gonna have a limited amount that you can deal with just general patrol. If you have 2, you have 3, you're gonna be able to do a lot more. And that's what I think this is gonna come down to. But if you set the priority of the top 2 first, and then see what you have after that, now you may want to take more away, you know, sub out more, and, you know, give more to nuisance. But I think the time you put into it is going to dictate how aggressive you are.
But how aggressive did you
Well, funding wise, I think they ought to follow the rules. I mean, I don't know about patrolling 5 zones all day, every day.
No, they don't do comedy.
Well, I mean, that's what it was before, correct? At one time?
At one time it was.
You know, and I'm not saying that's wrong, because that's what the council decided that they wanted. But
We
we're only dealing with 2.
We actually broke the
Right.
city up into quadrants and
Right.
try and work one area with the nuisance violations and work around so that we weren't missing any part of the town.
Right.
But it wasn't all day, was it all day?
No.
I didn't think so, but I wasn't sure.
You know, if I got 1 nurse for 6 patients, those 6 patients are gonna get different care than if I'm 1 nurse to 2 patients. And we're not really gonna know until we start doing it with the staff we have and the staff we hire. We're not really gonna know where that lands, because you can only do so much.
When we were doing the 4 quadrants, we were not, we're code enforcement at the time, we're not out every day. Because you have to, if there is a case, you have to do paperwork and all that, so there's gonna be downtime doing other things.
And I did that, we had 2 inspections, and we had 206 safety inspections that didn't get done every year. So, if we're going to do the 206 inspections every year, it's going to shake out how much time you're gonna have on nuisance, unless you're gonna hire somebody else if it's not enough, or do something to fix it.
Well, I would agree with Councilman Estes. I think it's going to be a learn as you go thing. I would use the mental model basically of our police department, because I think they're so successful at it. And so if somebody, and I agree with Councilman Osmus, it's going to be triage, basically. If somebody's robbing a bank, and somebody else is going 30 into 25, you spend your time on the bank robbery. And you, I think they do an exceptional job of communicating with the public, and the public understands that they have a job to do. They're setting boundaries, but they also, if you can come out of it with a friendship instead of an adversary, that's always desirable. And so that means lots of latitude and not micromanaging on the council level. And you're dealing, if you're spanning a room, then it's very straightforward. Your 2 buys are a certain distance apart. But when you start dealing with human behavior, almost everything moves into the gray area. So the whole goal is to be successful and to accomplish as much as we can. So I would be in favor of a lot of latitude and just basically that type of thing. Personally, I would wait and see how things go before we move into having the Board of Appeals. I think we'll have a good feel in 6 or 8 months what we want to do or don't want to do. But obviously, I'm 1 out of 5 votes, so that's my take. Do you have what you need now, Mike?
Okay, thank you very much. Yep, I think we've got a lot of notes to work on.
Okay, all right. Well, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes. Why don't we go ahead and we'll just conclude the meeting, take a rest break for the restroom, whatever, and we'll start up the meeting here at 6.